I use Inkscape to produce a visual design, a visually enhanced version of the user interface that I could then export to an SVG file with appropriate labels so I can correlate the different elements in the SVG to the user interface styles that I want to set up. And I collaborated through and with Chat-GPT to come up with the proper syntax for the XAML that I'm going to incorporate into the application, to the software application. So the XAML, Extensible Application Markup Language, right, is a syntax format that Microsoft set up, I believe, around 2005. So that's how long I've been using XAML, not consecutively, year in, year out, but a couple of years here, a couple of years there, I'm using XAML. And I merged the XAML style definitions with the code that I've defined in WPF using a WPF API. And ultimately, I'm going to refer back to the elements in the style definition using a style directive, right? That's going to point back to the named elements in the style definition. And so I'm going to do it quite a ways differently than what I show there, right? But this is what the styles look like at this point in time in the evolution of the program. And so I have a number of those styles developed and defined that I'm going to incorporate into the user interface. And the goal here is to use XAML to accelerate the definition of those styles. And so one of the techniques I've used in the past is I've set up a helper function, a factory method, that will apply the style to a particular UI element without having to necessarily write out the entire syntax or code expression for each time that I am setting up a style. Okay, so this is one of those, right? So there's different ways to apply a style in WPF, using the WPF API, using code. And in this case, I use try find resource because that's going to fail gracefully. So if it doesn't find the style, it's not going to be a big deal. I won't generate an exception in the program, an error in the program that will cause the program to close or shut down. If the style is not found, that's fine. Just like in typical web development, when you have a CSS style sheet selector, right? And you've referred to it by ID or otherwise, but primarily by class ID, then and the class ID is not there, it fails gracefully. The life moves on and everything works well. And so I wanted to incorporate that logic centrally in the app class so that if I change the approach to locating the styles, I wanted to add in any additional logic, I could do so. And so this is the evolving nature of the UI at this point. And again, if you look at the timestamp in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see how this was all evolving over time, right? So I have the basic structure in place for the styles, and I have the actual method for applying those styles to the user interface. With all of that done, it's just a matter of applying this approach to all the major visual elements, because not every element needs to be styled. In this particular case, the default style provided in Microsoft Windows and WPF is completely sufficient in the majority of the cases here, right? But there are key elements, visual elements, or UI elements, user interface controls, that I want to style and I want to enhance. Not only just because, but simply because the default Battleship gray, you might say, doesn't really work for me in the cases where I want something to be more representative of the quality of the interior application, right? So for me, and in my case, polishing the exterior is a way of indicating and aligning with the interior that so much work has been put in. So this is my conversation with Chat-GPT, where I'm providing it with the SVG that I exported from Inkscape, and I wanted it to generate the corresponding XAML markup. And I will actually say that in some cases, writing this type of styling in C# directly is faster and more direct than doing it in XAML. However, since I've defined a lot of it in XAML, my point of view is I might as well define 90% or 99% of it in XAML, so to be consistent. There are some small cases where if I have a for loop and I need to apply the same type of thing to disparate elements, then I can do that. And of course I can use base styles to achieve the same thing, but I have logic already in place and I'm not going to change that logic. And so, but this style now applies to 99% of the user interface elements. And so it's absolutely fantastic. Now, there was a case where there was a significant issue with Chat-GPT attempting to help me define the style for the list box as well as the data grid. In both cases, Chat-GPT was using either outdated information, or it tried to use updated information, but it wasn't able to put all the pieces together and do so in a way that aligned with what needed to be done using the current tools that I'm using, in this case Visual Studio 2022, C#11, and .NET 7. And so I know this, and I know that Chat-GPT doesn't know certain things, but I'm continuing the dialogue anyway, because if I'm going to use Chat-GPT in the future, it is in my best interest to make sure that Chat-GPT understands as much as possible, so that, well, in the hopes that the language model updates itself to not repeat the same mistakes. So I'm taking my time here talking to Chat-GPT at the very end of this process, and I'm going to update Chat-GPT's knowledge about how to appropriately address this particular scenario, which is I want to change the color of the row when I select an item in a list box and when I select an item in a data grid. I had to go out and get that information on my own. Stack Overflow didn't even have up-to-date information on that. I spent maybe an hour on Stack Overflow just looking at that and trying different things, because you have to run these declarations, you have to run them through the code, and that can take time too, launching the program through a Visual Studio debugger, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I got to the end of all of that iterative testing process to find out that none of the solutions that were current on Stack Overflow, at least the ones that I found, and I went through maybe 5 or 6 of them, none of them worked. So anyway, what did work is, fortunately, Google still works well as a search engine, and it was able to point me to the right article on Microsoft.com.